But what came out of that process was an effort tied to the tier land use framework that had real stakeholder buy-in and a shared belief that Vermont could advance housing production and protect natural resources together. That commitment carried forward into the legislative process the next year. Many of us spent months in your committee rooms working with you through drafts and questions. And in the final weeks of the session, the bill was rewritten multiple times. Stakeholders stayed at the table because Act 181 created a process, not just a policy outcome. That process intentionally shifted substantial work into implementation and rulemaking, with the understanding that refinement could continue and that transition would take time. A bill the size and the level of complexity as 181 was a massive undertaking. And as more time is spent turning the words from the page into action, we need to now take the time in this process to make some technical corrections and transitional certainty as things are rolled out. 181 relied on interim mechanisms, including temporary Act 250 exemptions, and to avoid regulatory gaps while municipalities and regions adapt to new responsibilities. It also assumed that rulemaking would allow for technical refinement, including tailored Act 250 review in Tier 3 and the road rule to what was necessary to protect relevant natural resources. Those assumptions are now being tested. As implementation begins, we are hearing that many municipalities that could apply for Tier 1A are not doing so. Similarly, many indicated that they will not opt into Tier 1B. The reasons vary, but include uncertainty around administrative capacity, coordination with regional plans, and clarity around review standards. At the same time, regional planning commissions are navigating significant statutory changes related to future land use mapping, targeted housing targets, and Tier 1B designation process under Title 24 and 32. If interim Act 250 exemptions expire before these issues are resolved, Vermont risks creating an immediate regulatory gap. Large-scale and rural housing projects alike currently covered by interim exemptions would face renewed Act 250 jurisdiction without a clear or functional alternative pathway. The practical consequences are straightforward, with uncertainty hitting the development community and slowing progress. That outcome would directly undermine the core purpose of Act 181 and conflict with statutory requirements that regional plans provide sufficient opportunity to meet housing targets. There are also emerging concerns about how Tier 1 is being interpreted in practice. Again, the regional planning commissions have raised questions about guidance that may result in growth areas being mapped more narrowly, despite clear statutory direction to accommodate a substantial majority of regional housing targets. I know how much you are all undertaking, but I believe these committees would benefit from a focused hearing on Tier 1 implementation. Without interim exemptions being extending, housing production could become a collateral damage while those questions are sorted out, and the state cannot afford that chance. Similar risks exist in Tier 3 in the road rule. A central understanding of the Act 181 legislative process was that rulemaking would determine how Act 250 criteria apply in Tier 3 and the road rule areas. Those legislative conversations explicitly contemplated that the Land Use Review Board may limit application criteria
and tailor review to protect relevant natural resources. The determination that such tailoring is not allowable that was made by the Land Use Review Board represents a significant departure from what many participants understood to be the legislative intent. A strong reaction to the initial Tier 3 draft rule and the determination that the road rule does not need rulemaking reflects that a disconnect exists. If Tier 3 and the road rule move forward without additional time for refinement, Vermont risks implementing a framework that lacks stakeholder support, increases uncertainty, and invites conflict rather than collaboration. Act 181 worked because stakeholders shared responsibility for the outcome. The same collaborative approach is needed now. The questions before the legislature are not whether to change the goals of Act 181, it is whether to ensure the transition does not unintentionally undermine them. Thank you for your time and your continued engagement in this work.
And again, we're gonna hold questions till the end. We have a lot of witnesses to get through.
Super, thank you so much. Okay, so we're moving on to Representative Sibilia, who's joining us as representative really of the rural comments. Yes, welcome, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, senators. Thank you for having me in. And thank you, Chair Watson and Sale for joining us actually last week at the Rural Caucus. We have a bill, H 730, that is sponsored by bipartisan sponsors of the Rural Caucus, looking at moving the deadlines forward. It is also looking at requiring notice to folks that are impacted, which is everyone in Tier 2 and Tier 3. We are also looking at providing assessors and listers some guidance on how to consider the tiers when we are thinking about property values. I will be brief, probably here in my comments, and say to you something that I said to Chair Watson and Senator Hinsdale when they joined us, and that is we all talk about this bill as a housing bill. We need to remember that in addition to making housing easier in many parts of our state as a stated goal, it also creates a very significant regulatory burden for rural Vermont. And because of that, we think that time is really, really important. And not included in our bill, but something I hope you will consider, and I've asked our environmental folks to think about, our tools to help folks that live in these rural areas comply with this increased regulation, this increased conservation that we are also, that is also a part of this. And so I will ask you to keep that in mind. This is not just a housing bill, it is also a conservation bill, and the result of that is a significant amount of regulation for rural folks. I'd ask you to remember or to keep in mind that if you have enough money, if you have enough legal representation, if you have enough patience, you are likely going to be able to build wherever you would like in the state of Vermont that you can find and do so. And what is the effect of that? I would say already, I live in rural Vermont, I represent 2 ski areas. We are, 1/5 residents, 4/5 second homes. So I can see it with my eyes. We have rural gentrification, which is happening now. Without careful thought and tools for the Vermonters that live in rural Vermont, we will accelerate that. And my neighbor who has lived on their land, their family for 100 years, if they want to provide the opportunity for their child to have a piece of that land, to build a road to the piece of that land, perhaps they can't afford the engineering for that, but someone else from away may be able to. I don't think that's the intention. The intention that we had here was to make it so that rural Vermonters could not stay. We also want them to comply. I believe that we need to protect our environment. We need to help keep people safe. How do we make sure that we have tools in place? Please, consider that. I want to also say thank you for taking this up. The last thing that I will just share with you is the Rural Caucus for last year and this year has had our friends at the RDCs, the LCT and others in over and over and have and alert, and we've asked about public engagement. And I will say to you that Act 181 did not include the intentional type of outreach that is really necessary for the amount of Vermonters that are impacted, which is nearly every. And finally, I am a commissioner on my regional planning commission and went recently to a meeting. We were fortunate enough to have Chair yes, from the LERB come. We know that the LERB is working really hard. I see her in a lot of meetings. She came and explained to the commissioners and the process and where things were. And then we had the staff from the Women Regional Commission explaining where our commission was. And our commission will be one of the last to have their maps approved. Draft maps will be presented in May, and what I think we're seeing right now is a pretty robust back and forth discussion between the RPCs and the LERB. So it's not expected that those maps will be finalized until early next winter. The road rule currently will go into effect in July. That's a pretty significant mismatch in terms of Vermonters being able to comply and understand. And so I thank you. I've been haunting the House leadership about the urgency for taking this up. They direct me here. And so thank you for this joint hearing, and thank you for coming to the Rural Caucus. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
John, can you put that word down?
All right, super. Well, thank you. All right, so next we are going to move on to Mr. Baker from BAPTA, also the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. As just said, Charlie Baker with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission during the day, and also serve as a Government Relations Committee Chair for our state association. So I'm really here speaking on behalf of all the RPCs. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes, kind of level setting kind of how things are going in our process, and then turn it over to my dear friend, Catherine Dimitrick, to talk about next opportunities for next steps. So first, I do want to kind of just follow up the previous two speakers. This has been a good process for bringing alignment between regional planning and municipal planning. And I think when we get state buy-in, then we'll have all three levels of government lined up, particularly on these growth areas, which is really important. And then in terms of process, it's also been really good. I think we're probably at over 500 community engagement meetings that RPCs have had. Some of them have been like formal with a town planning commission. Others of them have been more informal, at a farmer's market or something to get input from community members. But a lot of that has been focused more on the tier 1B eligible areas, the growth areas. So just for you to know where our work has been focused. As Representative Sebeli mentioned, all the RPCs are on track to present our plans to the LERB and be done by the end of the calendar year. So we are not asking for any extensions of those timeframes, just as I know we were talking about timeframes on different aspects of this law. So we're still on track. And we are really working hard with every town to have at least some opportunity for a growth area in their town. Even if it's a small village, where they don't have a lot of infrastructure, those are still appearing on our maps as areas that could have growth maybe at some point in the future if the town wants. Which is also a big factor. There's a lot of, dynamic about what the town wants to do and what they want to be in the future. So far, those growth areas, I think in our looking at the draft maps, right? It's about 2.2% of land area. It's very close to the same amount of land area that is in the interim exemption areas. The difference is really that, the maps we're producing are more customized to what's going on in that town and where they want to grow. So, and a couple caveats on that, that number is a little low in that it doesn't include, I don't have a good draft map from central Vermont, so this region. It's usually first, but this one is lagged a little bit, it's.
Well.
Yeah. So that number will go up a little bit when central Vermont's areas, right now it only includes the old legacy designation areas. So, you know, failures in there, but it hasn't been fleshed out. On the flip side, so that'll drive that overall number up a little bit. And comment was made already about this. The comments that we're getting from the LURB are, as they're trying to guide us into applying the statute, are likely to bring our maps a little tighter. And so we'll come back to that subject. And then with regard to the housing targets, a big part of what we're also doing is, you know, can we fit a majority of the housing targets in these growth areas? The answers that have been coming up so far from the RPCs are yes. But I want to also make clear that not all the housing is in this growth area. So we're looking at in excess of 40% of housing growth having to be in rural areas. So I just want to, all of us to kind of keep that in mind. This is not rural versus urban. This is yes and. Taking advantage of that infrastructure and towns that are embracing growth and zoning is a key part, but we still need residential growth to be happening in the rural parts of the state as well. So I'll leave it at that and turn it over to Catherine for next steps. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Catherine Dimitrick, Executive Director of Northwest Regional Planning Commission. I'm following up on Charlie's testimony. I wanted to talk about next steps from the Regional Planning Commission perspective. So first, many of you know that we do have some recommended changes to tweak the implementation related to clarifying and simplifying the RPC mapping criteria, as well as realigning the designation benefits associated with our regional plan mapped areas to better support our historic centers and still allow additional benefits for our smaller communities. So we've been shared that with a few people and look forward to a future opportunity to talk about that. In terms of timelines specifically, as Charlie noted, all the regional planning commissions are on track to meet our deadline for adopting regional plans, so we don't see a need to adjust that timeline at this time. In terms of looking to the future, however, when regional planning commissions would like to make changes to their regional plans, right now the timelines for doing that takes about 6 to 9 months just for the adoption process, and so part of our recommendations is to add the ability in statute for RPCs to have a simpler, faster amendment process to really keep this Act 181 implementation framework a living, responsive process where we can regularly update our plans to reflect changing situations at the local level. So we think that's a real needed improvement moving forward to address the timeliness of implementation.
It's clarifying. Is there an appeals process
In the regional plan,
past the land use review board?
you know, that people can object to the
Okay.
land use review board approving the plans, and then that's what it's.
And they object to the LURP?
Yes, the Lord makes the decision as part of our plan.
Okay.
We do support time for the LURB to get things right on the road rule and tier 3. We think that's really very important because public trust in those processes are key to making the whole system working. And so it's important to get it right, not to get it on time where everybody thought it should be 3 years ago. So the important part is getting it right. So we do support that. Additionally, we don't have any concerns about extending the interim exemptions. Representative Sebelia noted kind of the interplay of timelines, but also, as you know, not all communities are opting into tier 1B. So when those interim exemptions go away, those exemptions don't continue in those towns. And because it takes a while to ramp up housing projects and get ready to go, there's definitely a possibility we could strand some projects in those communities. And so extension of the interim exemption really will help cover those communities as well. And just add sort of support processes, which still take a long time, even if you're acceptable. That's all.
Super, thank you so much. Okay, super. So we're gonna move now to Josh Hanford with BLCT. Welcome.
Thank you. My screen sharing here.
And is Sam not with you?
She is out sick today.
Oh, no.
Oh.
That's okay.
That's fine.
Time for stuff. That's very
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
So for the record, Josh Hanford, Director of Intergovernmental Relations with Vermont League of Cities and Towns. As everyone else has said, thanks for having this joint hearing. It really helps to have everyone split our time up. And these are important discussions. This was a landmark bill, you know, changing land use, statewide land use, long time in the making. So it's important to get this right, like everyone has said. I have a short presentation here, if I can get this to work. So, you know, BLCT represents all 251 municipalities, urban, rural, small, large. The reality is, you know, over 73% of municipalities are below 2,500 in population. But the number one issue over the last at least 3 years, I think it's as much as 5 years when we survey, is housing availability and affordability across municipalities of all sizes, shapes, and regions. And so what we want to do is help support the creation of new housing that municipalities need, envision, and plan for, and allow in local zoning. And so we're going to be just real high level basic here. We want to extend the temporary Act 250 exemptions, like you've heard. We want to delay, not stop or repeal, delay the implementation of the road rule and tier 3 jurisdiction. And we want to eliminate the requirements for municipalities to enforce the existing Act 250 permits when they become tier 1A areas. Doesn't seem to make sense. And that is been cited as one of the main reasons why municipalities are hesitant to pursue tier 1. So as you know, this is a review to everyone, but you know, what is Act 21? It's location-based jurisdiction rather than applying it based on the density or the number of units. And how is it triggered under the new process? Well, we have these new areas. The tier 1A is totally exempt from Act 250 if approved. Tier 1B is partial exemption from Act 250. Housing units up to 50 or fewer would be exempt. Tier 2, existing Act 250 applies, including the existing 5-5-10 rule on housing, you know, up to 10 units, 5 years, 5 miles. The tier 3, it's enhanced Act 250 jurisdiction. Any development may require an Act 250 permit review and is subject to final rules determined by the letter. And then there's the road rule, which is all development 800 feet or more, combination driveway. You know this stuff, but just trying to set the sort of ground rules so we're all talking about the same thing. So what is development? In Act 21, it asks the LURB to determine what development is for tier 3. The final rule could change, but the current draft for tier 3 contains this information that any improvements to existing homes or structures that's larger than 200 square feet or within 50 feet of an existing structure will be considered development. The construction of new wastewater or drinking water systems. You know, we've asked DEC to permit those. Is it right to also have a second review under Act 250 for those same structures and confuse that process? You know, any new homes or structures larger than that, 200 square feet, obviously. And then when it comes to roads and driveways and utilities, again, there's overlapping jurisdiction and permit processes that not sure we intended it to be duplicative at this point. And then trails. This may be one of the easier ones for the LURB to work out, but that's pretty high high restrictions on trails that go into some of our, areas where there is sense of habitat, but people, low density enjoyment of this conservation land is pretty important ethic in Vermont. So again, what we're calling for is the delay in the implementation of the road rule and tier 3 jurisdiction. This allows the municipal bodies to see, understand, and plan for this new jurisdiction while the regional maps and adoption process unfold. I think it's important to make sure folks understand that the future land use maps, which the RPCs are assisting communities with, I'm on my local planning commission in Randolph. We've got a view, and then it goes to the select board. It's being discussed right now. Do not include the new Act 250 restrictions that come with the road rule or tier 3. They're not on that map. So we're creating a map that has new future land use, says here's what we want you to build, but those maps don't contain the contemplated restrictions. That's a different set of maps that the LURB has that are for regulatory purposes. I think that's going to be confusing for a lot of public and a lot of select boards and a lot of planning commissions that have been working very hard with their regional planning commissions and their citizens to come up with these future land maps, these future growth areas. We think that all homeowners and landowners need time to participate in this process and understand. We need time for the local zoning to catch up and to really align with the guidance from the LURB, particularly on the road rule. I mean, that's mere months away, really. I know it's the heart of winter, but it's really, in the scheme of things, not that far off. And we need to have those rules and understanding how to implement it. Therefore, we're calling for a delay. And it's also appropriate for legislative oversight between the adoption and when this new jurisdiction takes effect. If this all happens all off cycle this summer and we come back and we realize, we didn't have time to tweak. I think that could be confusing and problematic, and others said it maybe undermine that trust of this process. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. So what's a map? Maybe 1 million? I don't know. But so Pittsburgh is in Rutland County, one of the first counties to have be farthest along in this process. You can see that Pittsburgh is a mid-sized town, has water and sewer, has planning and zoning, it's got some professional staff. It also has some areas in the future land use map. It doesn't have a downtown center, but it's got a village center, Cranbrook area, and village area. The pink area is all but the dark pink. So that's what's being mapped for some level of Act 250 relief. Whether they ever are eligible to pursue Tier 1A, I don't believe so, but probably Tier 1B in these areas will be approved at some point. So great, that's the areas where we're going to see growth and reduced jurisdiction. What I want to show you next is sort of how the other two new jurisdictions kick in. On the left is the road rule, all the shaded areas. And then on the right is the Tier 3. Some of you have heard this before, so sorry to repeat here. In most of the Tier 3 mapping and habitat, the significant natural communities, perfectly appropriate. There's some endangered species, there's small parts of that. Same with the headwaters. The headwaters where we have steep slopes, poorly drained soil, it's not appropriate to develop there. It's the habitat connectors, which are by definition around roads where there's forest on both sides. That's problematic when people live in those areas and we've invested resources in those areas. So this is that corner road, pretty significant road. There's existing homes and small neighborhoods in this area. And you can see that when you place the habitat connectors that's in the proposed rule for Tier 3, the darker yellow is the 800-foot buffer that's being considered. The lighter yellow shaded area is the 2,000. We don't know which one it's going to be, but you can see what that does. Any structure more than 200 square feet would trigger Act 250. And then outside of that, the gray area is the road rule. So you're essentially forced with, don't we want to develop along the road where we already have driveways and fiber and utility poles and 3-acre stormwater ditches, and we're treating our human impact rather than have someone bypass that and go deeper into the forest and the road. Either way, it's sort of cutting off the choice for many rural communities. And this isn't isolated. When we go to Sorry, I got some other maps here, but my up top is freezing.
Well, while you're doing that, I just wanna say
Oh, sorry, do.
sorry, yeah.
Can we clarify?
Well,
Question?
I mean, I hope VLCT can get to this, but I feel like it's a real failure on the legislature's part to have done anything with tier two. But like, there's nothing that is tier two, and maybe we can all work on that,
Well,
but.
let's talk more about that.
Yeah, okay, I'm jotting.
Yeah, so just more maps, right? So Moortown, Ripton, I think that's in Chittenden County up there, maybe Westford. This issue is not isolated, is the point of these other maps. And we're talking about state highways, in some cases, we're talking about neighborhoods where there's a lot of investment. And so this will impact a lot of Vermonters that have private property along these roads. Roads are where people live, roads are where investment is happening. Roads arguably is where we want to continue to grow. So we think this is a specific reason why we want to hold on, make sure we've got this right, make sure that all the final rules, there's comment, there's notice. There's a lot of this dialogue going on, so we can better understand how this will impact our property owners. Maybe I should just stop there. I know I have a closing slide, but this is freezing on me here.
I think your points well has been.
Yeah, you've heard this before, the sort of range that we're talking about here with the new tier one area that will allow more development. Maybe roughly the same size as our existing Act 250 exempted areas. But the new areas that could be under increased jurisdiction could be a significant portion of the state. And so that sort of grand bargain that this represented, folks would call into question that if we don't take the time to make sure we understand what we're doing, what the intent was. That's it. I know you have a lot of witnesses and many of you've heard this before, but.
No, it's great. I mean, you've actually heard it. Once you hear it 2 or 3 times, right? Sort of, you hear it 3 times.
That's right.
So we're gonna hold questions and then, so people write down your questions and,
Because I think there will be time at the end.
I think, well, we have a lot of robust questions, so. Great.
I didn't say it, but the staff, they're working very hard. They've been doing their job, trying to implement statutes that are passed. This is not any way a dig at them. I want to be very clear. They have been working very hard to try to move this process along. I think they could benefit from some clarity here of the pushback they've heard, the
Yes.
comments they've heard from citizens.
And we were hoping they would be with us today. They're out on an on-site visit and aren't able to join us, but will be with us for our next hearing.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're up to Mr. Groveman from BNRC. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for the opportunity to testify. So for the record, I'm John Groveman. I'm the Policy and Water Program Director for Vermont Natural Resources Council. I submitted testimony that I put together with Kate Gallagher, who's here, who's our Director of Sustainable Communities.
Thank you. We,
Tara Miller, who's behind you, who's our new Forest Program Director.
oh, great.
Karen?
Tara.
All right.
DRC, as I think most of you know, hopefully you do, we've been around almost as long as Act 250, we're over 60 years old. And a couple of points I want to make is, so, DRC's DNA, we've always been about sustainable communities. We were formed by farmers and foresters really concerned about the changing landscape, the development pressure of the 70s, when we were implementing a lot of these landmark environmental laws at the state and federal level. And we've always been about all aspects of sustainable communities. So where we grow and live and build houses, and also protecting working lands, forests, farms, and our critical natural resources. And we were involved with the creation of Act 250, and we've been involved in implementing Act 250 over the years. And we were heavily involved with Act 2021, along with everyone that you've heard from, I would say, like, I never really thought of Act 181 as a grand bargain. I really
I thought of it as, and think of it as really generational change to how we look at land use and implement land use policies in the state of Vermont. Recognizing the need for housing, GRC clearly recognizes the need for housing. And the tier one process, locational jurisdiction, with identifying areas where we want to grow, we are very supportive of that. We've engaged in reviewing every map that's coming through, we're attending site visits, we're really digging in with the regional planning commissions, and I will second that. Not only is I think the LURB, it's very early days of the LURB, they have so much on their plate. But they are working hard to implement tier one, tier three, the road rule. The regional planning commissions are doing an incredible job working with their cities and towns, so it's really heartening to see this incredible generational change to our land use on going into effect. So, and I was really hard to hear the comments that I listened to as I was waiting to testify, because I think there's a lot of agreement. The NRC also supports these extensions to the time for the road rule to go into effect, for the time for tier three rule to be adopted, to even the forest protection criteria and the interim activity exception. And I just want to take some time to explain why and talk a little bit about why it's premature to really, like, I understand, showing maps that are based on drafts that are coming out now, but the work is fluid and really in the beginning phases. BRC's been at the table with, I think, everyone in this room, business groups, environmental groups, groups representing municipalities. We want to get the road rule right. We want to get tier three right. We want to get all of this right because it is so important, and we do need more time. We agree with that. And the fact that we need more time, I think, is evidence that I would just caution people about, it's fine to show maps and drafts and what things are in this moment in time, but that's not the way that it's going to end up. And I think it's impossible to say right now, I don't know what tier three is going to look like in terms of the mapping, in terms of other, it might not just be the maps, it could be the size of a project. What is that size? I think VLCT alluded to that, totally agree. We haven't figured that out. And as part of the stakeholder process, and BRC is a stakeholder in all of these groups, along with everyone that you've heard from, we have said this to the LURB. We're like, hey, we're not comfortable with how these early maps look. We're not comfortable with some of these definitions of what triggers development. We want to protect critical natural resources. And getting back to why I don't really love the grand bargain term is that this is really about we could do more than one thing at one time. We can identify areas where we need housing and growth, but we have to deal with climate change, the floods that we're seeing. Forests are a huge part of mitigating flood impacts. We're losing habitat, we're losing biodiversity. These are not opinions. This is documented. You've had scientists in, I know, in the Senate Natural Resources Committee. So that's what Act 181 was. It was to try to look at our whole system and update it. There are areas where we know we want to grow or need housing, where Act 250 is not adding value. I'll say, as I always say, I don't think Act 250 or other regulations are the main impediments of why we're not having enough housing in the state. But if there is something that we can do to make it easier to build housing, we're for it. But there are a lot, as you know, we've looked at a lot of stresses out there and why we're not seeing housing built. So we support that, but we equally, and it was really great to hear. I heard support. We have to go forward and it's at some point implement the road rule, implement tier three. But we need to get it right. It's more important to get it right than to go fast. So we support those extensions. On the road rule, I want to, there's so much that's said about the road rule, and I hate that name for it, actually. I wish that we can call it something else.
Well, you could always propose another one.
You tried.
And it's a slur.
But we don't know, so this whole, 800-foot road, 2,000 feet of combined roads and driveways, the LURB is defining what's a road, what's a driveway. We don't even know what that is going to look like at the end of the day when the LURB implements guidance. And actually, we've asked the LURB to actually promulgate a rule because we think it would give them more power to more narrowly tailor how the road rule is applied. But whether it's a rule or a guidance, we don't really know the answer to that question yet. But I can guarantee you that, one house in 800 feet off a driveway is not going to trigger the road rule. That's a driveway, like, and maybe two houses, we haven't determined that. What's the size of the houses that are being served? What is the footprint of the development? These are all the factors that we're debating and discussing, even more than debating, and we need more time for that. But I just want to caution you all as you are in the building, and there's, a lot of conversations that are going on. If you have questions about how the road rule is going to end up at the end of the day, let's talk about them. Let's get the blurb in, let's get other people in to talk about it. But please don't assume that we know, like we're locked in, that this is the way it's going to be. And so with more time, we can refine these issues. We can engage the public better. Of course, agree with that. It's good government. We need to inform people, we need to educate people about these changes. We don't know what they are yet exactly, so it's a little early to tell people this is what is going to happen. But with more time, we could, and the LURB has done a good job of bringing people into the process. This has been, it's really interesting because people know more about sort of these changes and they know about the way the law has worked for a long time. I have seen comments like I didn't know, like in the regional plan, there's a map that shows that's a conservation area and my property's in it. That's been for 20 years, like this person's property has been like in this conservation area. And the regional plan doesn't determine Act 50 jurisdiction or any regulatory requirement. So I think what's happening is people are engaged in this process and they're looking for the first time about regional plans, maps, Act 50, and they're learning about things that aren't even new things in the law. And that's a good thing. But I just want to urge, as these conversations go forward, to ask questions, ask the LURB, ask the NRC, ask all the other parties in the room. Please just don't jump to conclusions about like how this is going to end up. And so with more time, I think we could get these rules and initiatives and provisions tailored appropriately and do both things and have our areas for housing and growth and have protecting critical natural resources. And that's what BNRC's goal has always been, is critical natural resources. It's not looking to have wide swaths of land, pulled into Act 250. There's not a reason to do that. And the last thing I'll say is, well, two more things. One is, I do think that, and I think Megan Sullivan said this, but there is a bit of a dispute. Like we feel that the law gives the LURB the authority to only apply certain Act 250 criteria. If the road rule triggers Act 250, if Tier 3 does. And so, we're going to continue to advocate. That's a way to narrow sort of the scope. We haven't determined what the jurisdictional triggers are, but once we do, the next question is, well, like, what is the review involved? So those are issues that are being discussed, and that can further narrow or tailor the review to what the issues are. And then on the interim exemptions, just I want to be clear that obviously, I think there's evidence that it's helped, facilitate some housing. While we're developing all the maps, I think it makes sense to leave those in place for, a period of time. And so we do support that.
Great, and on that note, I'm gonna ask the first question, which is, if we're all in agreement that we need to extend, what is the agreement on the time frame? What is the timeline you would propose? You're the planners, you're the towns, you are the natural resources community. What's the time frame that you would like us to consider? Because we obviously have our own timeframes, but if you're all in agreement, we'd like to know.
Yeah, I would suggest, if we could all agree, it would be great if you give us some time, and let's see what everyone has to say, and like, we could just like kind of talk it out a little bit, but it's good to start with an agreement that we should extend them and it should be for a meaningful period of time. But I don't, my lawyer, Katie Gallagher, won't let me say what that date is. I'll get in trouble.
But I think we would appreciate actually some suggestions from the stakeholder community, what those timeframes, what a timeline would be for each of them.
Yeah.
And
maybe
so,
we can agree, if not, you can have a, a menu of dates that, you could discuss and choose from.
I think they'll.
Well, and I could also see that some of the extensions are related to each other, right? Like this one needs to be 6 months after that one, and so there's some linked logic to how these deadlines go. If we're gonna extend one, we should probably think about the others as
Yeah,
well. So
absolutely.
it seems like there's a package, right? And so yeah, I'm gonna ask one other follow-up question, unless you have.
Yeah.
No, I think we'd like that back if we could, ASAP.
I would just ask for a little bit of time, like, as I assume this is gonna turn into a bill. And there'll be an opportunity to come in and as you're going
That,
through language,
yes, just to clarify, that is the intention, that we're gonna have a bill that encompasses these requests and others. So we'll
So
see that.
We'd like this as soon as we can.
I understand something.
Because our next joint hearing is Friday and then we'll have another one on Tuesday. So we would love to have these ASAP.
And so I have one further follow-up question, which is actually for.
Yeah, I don't have to sit here either, like, I don't.
It's an open discussion. The stakeholders are on.
And then I see, I can sense that Senator Harding has a question.
Yeah, a few.
Okay.
And there are some other questions, I think Thomas, David, and David, I think they're.
And just to, before we jump into it, I do wanna at least say for everyone's benefit that this is not the last time that we will have you in to our committee, so we don't have to necessarily get all of our questions out at this moment. We're gonna have the opportunity for a deeper dive. But my follow-up question for Mr. Baker is about, I was very interested that as a part of your outreach process, that it sounded like it's very robust, it went to farmers markets. Was all of that mandated through the outreach through statute, basically?
There's some kind of general guidance to do significant engagement. I can't remember the exact terminology, but
Okay.
you know, there was some clear intention that we understood from the legislature to do as much outreach as we could.
Yeah, well, I asked that mainly because I'm thinking about the parity with the tier 3. So I think there's more there that I'd like to dig into about that outreach. So
Okay, I don't know who these questions are for, 'cause there were so
But
many.
everybody's here, so.
But the three things that I was confused about or want to know more about that I was hearing. Was one about the stranded projects, that's a term that people use. Like, what does that mean and how would that happen exactly? And if we extend the date, would we then strand different projects along the road? So just a question of how extending the exemptions. The extension on the exemptions and the stranded projects and how those interact. And then someone mentioned, or multiple people, I think, the elimination of the requirements for municipalities to enforce Act 250 exemptions, and I don't understand that, that's apparently been one of the reasons why communities aren't opting into tier 1B or 1A.
1A.
One of them, one of the tiers, it's already been established, but it's tiers primary. So I don't understand that as well. And then the habitat connectors, Josh's maps. I'm just interested in what that definition is that's in the law and how that definition is being applied, and maybe this is more of a question for the LURB, if those things you were showing were from LURB maps. Because that's not my understanding of what a habitat connector is, but I might be, none of this is my area of expertise, so I'm just trying to understand it better as we're trying to figure out these things. So those were 3 areas of confusion for me, so.
If you would like to, and I will add that we will have. Particularly Alex Weinhagen, from the Land Use Review Board to come in to dig into that, but if you have something to offer on that, that's.
Mostly just getting these on the table, so.
Yeah, that's great, it's helpful.
So I was on the tier 3 working group, and my understanding of the habitat connector, based on input from Fish and Wildlife, is roads with forest 75% or greater forest cover on either side. Those are areas that critters, and plants are more likely to travel through, but they're not exclusive, right? You also see critters travel through fields and down riparian river corridors, right? But that is my understanding of the natural resource criteria that's being applied here, which also comes from sort of like conservation design work that was done earlier, that was done through some landowners volunteering to put game cameras and such on their property. And so I think there's a history there that you might want to talk more about, because I certainly attended the Moyle County, input session on tier 3, and the former A&R secretary was quite concerned about that being used, those voluntary sort of data points being used, in this regulatory fashion.
Okay, it's just confusing because, I mean, my gut reaction is that we don't want Habitat using our roads as connectors, it's not safe for them. They're gonna get hit, and it's not safe for drivers either, so I would think that we would, if we're gonna try to encourage Habitat connectors, they would actually not be on roads, so that's why I don't understand this, and
All those tunnels under the road.
yeah, I mean, they're culverts, but also just like you want them to go where it's safer and what makes more sense and are not passing over roads.
But we
So-
have built roads through there.
But I'm obviously missing something, so I just wanna understand it better. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's.
I think some of our roads, they do cross Green Mountain National
Well,
Forest,
yeah,
and
yeah, obviously.
part of our comments to Alex and that working group was, well, if we have significant public lands that allow the road crossings or permanently conserved properties, perhaps those could be the ones that are included in tier 3 that have a requirement, because they're not gonna be developed anyways, and someone's private property that happens to have trees on both sides wouldn't be caught up in this if we have adequate habitat connectors already gained through conservation.
Exactly, so
Oh.
yeah, that's, so anyway, if we can dig into that.
Yes.
Yeah,
That would be
and then the other question was about tier 1A. So if you achieve tier 1A status, there's a big, long list of things you need to have in place and what you need to meet. Basically, to be determined, you do at least everything required in Act 250 and perhaps more to get complete relief. So then the question becomes, if you get complete relief, why are you then enforcing 20-year-old Act 250 permits that have conditions which may be in conflict with your current zoning,
Oh, it's.
current
big
regulations?
permit.
Yeah,
So
and-
the question
yeah.
of 30 branded permits.
and so you could have a housing project that under the municipality that achieves tier 1 requires less parking, but now you're enforcing an Act 250 permit that has even more parking that's required, requiring 2 sets of reviews and appeals, and you know, archaeologists in Cambrian Rise and Burlington is an example of an existing Act 250 permit, and so it just doesn't, I mean, municipalities aren't interested in taking on those responsibilities of permits that they never put in place, and that especially when their current land use regulations have been deemed to be meeting the intent
Right,
requirements.
That's helpful, so maybe digging in on that a little bit more
Yeah.
too.
Can I
just say that, these are good questions, but I think you should have Alex and you should have
Yes,
the A&R people in.
Yeah.
they were invited. They
Yeah,
wanted to make.
I think that's the way to really crack the nut of,
Right.
how this is all being defined, and it's all in flux, again, that's my main point, is that none of this is set in independent close, so.
Any questions from Sun Economic Development now, just to set the table for questions for further time for in the future?
I emailed you a bunch. I did
Who's you?
oh, both of you.
Okay, great.
And one thing, John Brogman, I'm gonna pick on you a little bit.
As long as it's a little bit.
Well, you said something about, I don't know if it would be one house or 2 houses, but our intent with the Home Act onward was to try and get rid of discrimination against multifamily housing, right? So, we don't want to still be using language and deference to the idea of you cut a big path to one McMansion, right? That's the problem with tier 2 and tier 3, is you have the 10-5-5.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of deference in the law to large 10-acre properties, not to multifamily housing that could enrich a place like Pittsburgh.
Yeah, no, that's a good point and a fair point. I would just say that, out in tier 3, if you really narrow the area down, it's just a matter of making sure, whatever. I didn't make this point, but none of this is to prohibit development. It's, the road rule could be avoided, if you build, shorter road. Maybe tier 3 could be avoided based on these triggers. The LURB is actually having a robust conversation now about how homes that have ADUs and would not trigger the road rule, so that is in the mix of conversation, but
Also actively duplexes as well, so I think that's part of the
Yeah.
Could you
opportunity.
introduce yourself for the record?
Sarah Miller, first about like program director at the NRC. That's part of the conversation, so I think that's great feedback, so getting back to the learner of what the legislative intent is for both like family and what, you know, if it's.
So,
duplex,
I apologize to interrupt. We have lost a quorum, which I would just like to say is unfortunate, because this is a very important topic. And I was planning to go till noon, which it
Is
is
now.
now noon.
But this
So-
was a great start to our joint hearings and thank everybody. You notice all the women are left. I just want to point out that who is left here.
That's
There is so
Right.
who are willing to stay to extend the else
I think I'll talk about it too.
But there you go.
But in terms of committee members,
We're gonna figure this out.
yeah, I think we should leave it to.
Shall we, okay.